You and Concord might be dead. Is there any hope for such a game? Kind of sounds like a joke, but honestly, after the open beta weekend and a complete lack of players, and I'll get to some specific statistics in a minute, it does feel like the game is definitely going to struggle.
I played a bunch of it over the weekend, and I was kind of con bored with what I had to see and experience, which is a shame, because actually, Scott, I was on the record as hoping that Concord would actually be a fun time.
I mean, you always want things to be good, the amount of money, the amount of attention this is being given. Like, it is one of those things, the reason I'm so fascinated by it is that we haven't seen Sony mess up this badly since Destruction Allstars back in 2020 or 2021.
I forgot that game even existed.
Well, so did they, by the most part. I mean, they put some of the story chapters behind microtransactions. They never really walked that stuff back. There was a bunch of back and forth in regards to how they were going to monetize it in the lead up to launch. And then once it did come out and everyone realized that you had to pay to get some of the story stuff, they just didn't do anything about that. The game died and they just never went back to it. However, I do think it's interesting that because they're a first party and because it's a console game, like, you know, for the console that they're selling, they do have to maintain the servers, which is one of the questions I have about Concord. How long is this thing going to go? How long do they drag it out? Something like Avengers got shut down, whereas Concord has to have legs because they need to believe in it. However, I'll throw some statistics in here. Concord is outside the top 100 sales chart on Amazon. It's also not in the top 15 PlayStation 5 trending if you go on the PlayStation Store. And Amazon's charts do include pre-orders. Black Ops 6 is already on there. But like I said, Concord not in the top 100. And the PlayStation Store rating is about 2.6 out of 5 stars. People who are logging on the PlayStation Store itself. And it's outside the top 100 games being played on Steam, even with the open beta. It peaked at about 2,300 players on Friday when the open beta started, and then only had around 1,000 players every in the 24-hour period from then. So we're already dealing with Steam numbers, but the fact that it has a £35 price tag and it's out on August 23rd means that there are very few things they can do at this point unless they want to just delay it and try and make a different game.
It's a huge shame because we've seen this last year, that positive word of mouth. Like, people are dying for new shootery experiences, right? We're kind of fed up with Call of Duty, by and large. I know people are looking forward to Black Ops 6. I'm kind of tentatively looking forward to that. But by and large, the live service shooting landscape has been kind of just a bit stagnant over the last, in recent memory. So Concord should have been able to go in there, and even if people were kind of reticent about the hero shooter setup, whatever, like the kind of Guardians of the Galaxy inspired tone, the gameplay should hopefully have been able to shine through and make a statement about why this hero shooter is worth playing. But it hasn't really done that.
No.
Not even in the way that X-Defiant managed to cut through stuff. And again, I have no idea how that game proved to be a hit because I played that and did not like it as well. But my big issue with Concord, having played it, is that I love the character designs. I think it's very vibrant. I think the presentation's really fun. I like the idea of what they're going for with the kind of like live service narrative of it all.
Yes.
But the gameplay feels like you're walking through treacle. And I'm not saying that as someone who is averse to slow-paced multiplayer games. I actually really Rainbow Six Siege is a good example of that. I put so many hours in that. Hell Let Loose, yes, which I put even more hours into that. But with Concord, the issue I have is that so much of it is based... the gameplay itself is based around movement. But it's so slow to move around, and the aiming feels kind of janky and funky. These are all things that you'd maybe get to grips with if you had a longer period of time to spend with the game. But at that prohibitive £40 price point, there's not a good chance it's going to happen.
I think they're taking the price point from Helldivers 2. Like, that was a game that it didn't get too much marketing either, but there was always a groundswell around it anyway, especially because it was coming out on PC as well. And obviously that game blew up. There are some articles doing the rounds that it's lost 90% of its player base, but that's mainly because it peaked.
Don't worry about it.
I was going to say, it peaked at half a million. It peaked at 500,000 players. Like, if it can retain 40 to 50,000 people, that's more than enough for an ongoing live service game, as opposed to something like Concord, which is barely hitting less than 5% of that. But still, that whole idea of if they just had solid enough gameplay it would work, I think is arguably true. But then a lot of the tone here is just so MCU adjacent, so Disneyfied, so we've got Guardians of the Galaxy at home kind of thing. To the point where obviously that was the most on the face stuff that was pointed out, was that it just felt like another MCU style release. And that got in the way of something like the Avengers game as well. I guess, just that idea of the thing that you kind of want and then this weird knockoff version that you're getting instead. And also in the gameplay sense, this game has a crew system where you're supposed to play characters in a certain order to try and stack buffs and build your crew and go into different modes, with the idea of, I'm going to play these 3 characters in a row. Nothing about the game incentivizes that, barely tutorializes it anyway. I played quite a lot of Concord, mainly because I was just dying for a first-person shooter. So I was like, cool.
We all are. We're starving here. We're thirsty for the goodness.
Yeah, I'll dive on this thing. All Concord did was remind me of other hero shooters. I ended up reinstalling Overwatch 2. I was just like, I'll just play something else. But my point is, if they had nailed those, what would be the more innovative parts of what they're going for, maybe they could stand out in that regard. Whereas it's super easy to just look at this as it is and be like, it literally is the thing you expect. It's the knockoff game. It feels quite soulless, even though the facial animation, the presentation, there's clearly a lot of time invested. Like, the presentation is unbelievable. It's just a shame that it feels like various departments, art departments, etc., were just asked to aim for such a low bar.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The visual aspect of it does immediately, even beyond the genre dynamics, feeling kind of stale and dated in 2024. I know Overwatch 2 is kind of getting a little bit of a resurgence.
Love it.
Probably because everyone's hearing that you're playing it stuff. But by and large, when you have that, the visual kind of familiarity does stagnate it a little bit. And to be fair, like, I enjoy quite a lot of the character designs here. I kind of really enjoy the look of them.
I'm here for Hamar rules.
Yeah, absolutely. But overall, I do understand that it's coming from kind of a familiar-ish, area. The Guardians comparisons are totally spot on. It is going for that kind of irreverent, mercenary crew who accomplishes missions, and we're all kind of friends, but also enemies.
There's a quippy guy.
Exactly.
Guy.
And so I totally understand that Concord has not really given itself the best grounding to perform well. Whereas something like Helldivers, obviously you have the PvE aspect there, the sense of community that you get from the major orders and stuff, and the fact that it's pulling from Starship Troopers, which is obviously beloved internet classic in terms of that movie's reputation. But with this, it is kind of compounding, gathering all sorts of different things that I think audiences overall are a little bit fatigued
I think the whole thing as well just reeks of the Jim Ryan era, where it feels, like I said, very cold, very corporate. But it's interesting in terms of the wider context. Like, this is the same Sony that cancelled the Last of Us multiplayer, the Twisted Metal multiplayer game. And then to stick with this as the one that'll definitely work, guys, because I guess all the test audiences or all the most homogenized data points they can look at point to the idea of, if you do something Disney-like, well, of course that'll work. Look at the success of the MCU.
It's super frustrating. I'm going to go on about this a lot. I really do find it frustrating that the Last of Us multiplayer game was the one that was binned off, because I understand that, you do not want single-player studios primarily focusing their time on multiplayer stuff. It's how you get garbage like Suicide Squad or the Justice League. So I understand it from that perspective. But we know that, late last year, or at some point last year, Bungie came in and were doing consultancy stuff for, all of Sony's kind of live service portfolio that was in development, and they identified the Last of Us multiplayer game, Last of Us Factions, as one that
just was not
going to work out in the long term. But I look at that and I'm like, that would have provided something fresh and unique, and provide, something that was thoroughly brand PlayStation beyond just brand Marvel in terms of, what you're going to bring to the multiplayer space. So I do have to agree with you there. I think that of all the stuff that they could have progressed with, and that's not to invalidate everyone's work on Concord, because I think there is some really cool stuff in there. But if you're going to, try and put your foot forward for this is why we need to be in the multiplayer space, if you have Helldivers 2 at the start of the year, and you follow it up with the Last of Us Factions game, given the Last of Us is also one of PlayStation's biggest IPs.
And the TV show's rolling out.
Exactly, it would have made more sense. I'm wading through my words right now.
But that's the thing. If you talk about the overall tone isn't the only issue with it. I do think that there is an increasing amount of groan-worthy reactions to stuff that feels like it's chasing Disney. And obviously a lot of that stuff happens within Disney now as well. But at the same time, when you get down to just playing it, like, I love playing as Hamar. I enjoy playing as that rocket woman as well. That's a rocket. Bit of the old rocket.
Got the rocket.
And then doing the old the shoulder barge thing. There are bits and pieces of the gameplay that are satisfying enough. But I'm literally just getting a bead on a player and taking them out, like something that you can do in a million other shooters. And so for me, the things that start being off-putting are when you're loading into a match, you have to watch the same cutscene every single time, even though obviously the PlayStation 5 is selling itself on instant loading and things like that. And the fact that when you end a match, you'll kick back to the main menu, or just like general presentational elements that get in the way of flow. Because like you said, the way that they are presenting everything is like, it's very how do you do, fellow kids, but at the same time, you have this presentation that's very slick, very colorful, you want to just jump in and enjoy that stuff, but it gets in its own way at every turn. I know that they're very small nitpicks, but at the same time, it fails to tutorialize.
Accumulates.
Yeah, it definitely
builds up.
Like, it doesn't tutorialize the crew stuff. The story stuff, as much as they've said they're going to do weekly updates, it's like a minute cutscene, and it doesn't mean anything. You get the original story one when you first boot the beta up, but after that, it's just the gang hanging out, just...
And it's a big ask to get people to sit through that many cutscenes as you jump in as well. Like, as much as, again, like, I think it's interesting what they're trying to do here, it just feels like it's got its wires slightly crossed. We're going to have kind of like a bite-sized multiplayer experience where you can hop in and out of rounds without committing too heavily to long, sessions of game time. But we're going to make you sit through all this lore and make you try and invest in it from that perspective. So it does kind of feel a little bit contrived in that sense. When you think about the reason why Overwatch took off, obviously, the gameplay was fantastic. That's one of the best. Overwatch from like 2016 to like 2019 is one of the best multiplayer experiences ever. But whereas like the way that they handled the lore for that as well, they had that really clever marketing where it's not going to have our Overwatch, the really nice high production shorts. We're going to lead into all these different genres and try and get the superhero aspect and then put our own spin on it and stuff. Whereas with this, it doesn't feel like it's bringing enough unique personality to the table, and it just feels like we're trying too heavily to make our live service narrative, lore universe that you can invest in across, get Concord the merchandise beyond just playing Concord the game.
Yeah, and it's like, that's the thing, which is always the case with stuff like this. Obviously, we kind of felt it with something like Avengers and Anthem and Suicide Squad, where you're suddenly asked to give up a ton of your time, you're suddenly asked to invest in this wider world.
You gotta fight those 18 Brainiacs!
You gotta put so much time in to try and justify the asking price. And it just doesn't really add up. I think, obviously, the way that they're going about this, where you have a £35 price point, and then you've got the devs saying, look, we're doing story content for free, any additional characters, skins, all that kind of stuff, and you'll get a lot of that per season. It's just getting people to show up at the beginning. But even those of us who have tried, I was there for the early access beta last week, and then the open beta across the weekend, it already feels like it's burnt out. And another thing on the gameplay side is that even when people leave games, they don't get replaced. If you go into a game, certain modes have multiple matches in a row. If someone drops out, so you're a 3-person team against 5, those places don't get replaced, which they might change for the full release, but that seems like a huge thing to not have in your beta. It's an immediately off-putting thing.
Yeah, I also kind of thought that we were talking a little bit before about like the fact that the tutorialization aspects aren't that well integrated. It does kind of feel, whereas, the best live service games and hero shooters that I can think of, they have a very simplified language to how you approach things and how to structure a team well. You can totally ignore those and fail, but by and large, it does give you easy identifiable visual languages to understand where each character sits in the overall kind of like pyramid. And obviously you get that from like stuff in Concord, like silhouettes and stuff, and different characters are very clearly designed to be, this is the flanking character, this is the ambushing character. For me, it just doesn't lend itself as well to team-based synergy as something like an Overwatch does.
No, but that's another thing to throw in, is that it's interesting. One thing they are doing here, like in terms of the new stuff, the crew system, the storytelling, and then another new thing is persistent deployables from round to round. So you might want to set up some different walls, put some mines down, whatever it is, and they'll go across rounds, so you can try and flank certain routes that an enemy might take or whatever it is. But again, it's not really tutorialized. Matches are over so quick. I didn't feel like I had to bother with any of that stuff in regards to deploying like a strategic mentality for it. I know you played a lot more co-op than I did, but like it just doesn't feel like it encourages the thing that would otherwise differentiate it. Like it just is a hero shooter 101, and you kind of can just play it the same way you've been playing something like Overwatch for 8 years now.
And weirdly, it kind of feels a little bit more like it's pulling from Destiny's multiplayer and maybe a little bit of Halo, but without the kind of fun aspect of what Halo brought to the table. It does just feel kind of singular. Even though we're trying to integrate team-based solutions, it still feels like whenever I play the game, even with my buddy, everyone was kind of off doing their own thing, getting rolled by teams that were maybe just sticking together, but there was no clear way of me foreseeing how one ability would complement the other. There's no Overwatch moment where you could be an Ana and nano boost your Reinhardt and win the game or whatever. There was no point when I was playing where I felt like I was creating my own cool emergent narrative, which is the big buzzword and what gets me coming back to stuff like Helldivers 2. It didn't feel like it was bringing any of those endorphins to the surface.
No, my overall thing is just that I'm fascinated by the way this thing rolls out. Like I said, the last time Sony messed up this bad was Destruction Allstars, and they just never talk about it. Like there's that and Concrete Genie, 2 first-party games that had...
You're making games up now.
cool enough ideas at the core that just weren't supported whatsoever, and they completely royally effed Destruction Allstars and didn't do anything with it, post-launch. So the amount of money that's riding on this thing saying, do they just put it out to pasture because it's one of the projects that was greenlit during a previous CEO's tenure, or a previous head of PlayStation's tenure, or do they try and support it? Do they delay it? Do they change the pricing model?
They've got to keep it. They've got to keep going with it. I think the big concern for Sony's point of view here is that if you've got that kind of £40 price point, whereas with Helldivers 2, it was worth punting on for a lot of people because of the unique co-op aspects, the replayability, kind of the viral nature of it.
All it took was one gameplay clip, and it's like
exactly. This is entering a very overstuffed market. You like in The Simpsons when Homer, it's Marge's, the Twisted World of Marge Simpson, and she starts her own pretzel business, and Homer's there like, I'm so you trying to cram one more salty snack into America's already overstuffed food hole.
Massively.
That is exactly what Concord feels like.
The hero shooter is an overstuffed food hole.
The only way you cut through that is if you make it free to play.
Yes.
I think that's the only way that Concord will have greater legs. Not to pronounce its demise before it's even fully released, but I, like you, am struggling to see where the huck is for this when we've already got such an array of options that admittedly are stale, but have healthy player bases. So,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even something like Overwatch, for as stale as Overwatch 2 felt, has still maintained plenty more players than something like...
It's new character reveal got like over 1 million views on YouTube, so people are still invested in it.
There's still a vibrancy to it, and but like over to you down in the comments. What do you think of Concord, and are you going to be checking it out August 23rd?